You're listening to the podcast Coffee with Mike and Julie, Libertarians Talk Psychology. This is current commentary from an MBA businessman and a PhD psychologist.
Look what they done to my song.
Houston, we have a problem.
So today I want to talk about Apollo 13 story and the positive masculine, which is the masculine and the feminine. I'm going to use Carl Jung's idea, but I'm going to expand a little on that to evolutionary theory for the masculine and the feminine. But the Apollo 13 is a fantastic movie, dramatized a little bit. Some of it's not really true, about Jim Lovell, Fred Hayes, and Jack Swigert getting back to the Earth after their rocket blows up. And we have a clip with Gene Kranz, played by Ed Harris. Tom Hanks plays Jim Lovell, Bill Paxton plays Fred Hayes, and Kevin Bacon plays Jack Swigert. So the nutshell of review is this is the 13th mission of the Apollo moon landing, and they send them up, and right at 200,000 miles away from Earth, they have an oxygen tank blow up, faulty valve in the oxygen tank, which completely cripples the command module and drains all their power.
And the command module is the main unit?
If you watch the movie, you learn a lot about space travel that you don't know. They take the lunar module with them. They blow off a part of the container that holds all the fuel. The movie is absolutely wonderful, but some of the best parts of it is the launch. You feel like you're right there at the launching of the rocket, and you get the feel of how huge a device this is, and the power that is the explosions that have to lift that rocket off.
And for me, as an engineer, this movie is the epitome of the height of engineering. I mean, these guys, every one of them is an engineer.
Well, it does portray that, doesn't it? It really shows. Now, engineers are pretty much steeped in the masculine. You know, I have this joke about when I was a graduate student, my professor and I, he was, Irv Lane was an IO, head of the department, and an industrial organizational psychologist. He caused me to have to do a presentation to the engineering group. And we were in front of all these engineers, and I was doing my best to engage with them and relate to them. And I thought, oh my God, I'm flopping. This is horrible. I'm completely failing at engaging and gaining participation with these engineers. So at break, I said, it's a bust. I'm doing horrible. He said, Julie, you're not doing horrible. You're doing great. They're rolling in the aisles. That's how they express themselves. He was seeing something very different than I was seeing.
Well,
but he knew how to interpret these high-controlled men.
And you've commented before that the education of engineers, there's a lot of self-selection. The highly controlled men and women tend to go into engineering, and engineering tends to really drill it into you, to really be high disciplining.
Well, it's probably self-selection. You know, we've had my birthday pass, and the kids all identified me as a high helper during crisis times. You know, the idea is, well, maybe I went into psychology because of that. Well, it's self-selection. You go into your career because it fits your personality. I mean, we kind of know that. The self-selection going on is heavy duty. You don't select something that you're not good at and that you don't like. You select something you're good at and that you like.
Yeah.
So the engineers are high emotional control. I'm going to play a clip, but the movie is just pretty straightforward. When, you know, everybody knows the story, but it was a story. I was a high school senior, and everybody was glued to the TV sets, and we were sweating bullets for these astronauts.
This is 1970.
1970.
It was only 1969 that we had the moon landing.
I think the moon landing was 69.
That's Apollo 11.
11, I think.
Then there was Apollo 12 where they also landed on the moon. So within like 2 years, they have this third Apollo 13 and have this disaster.
Yeah. And it captured the attention of the whole world. And the movie is well worth watching several times, just because it's Ron Howard, and it's spectacular in some of its photography, and you get the feeling of the drama even though some of it's not accurate. They weren't down to no amps in the command module. They rerouted it. I would also recommend watching a YouTube video called The 13 Things That Saved Apollo 13, something like that, because one of the dramatic things that I found out is that if the explosion had happened at any other time, they wouldn't have made it.
The comment I want to emphasize is how the entire world was focused on this. They had gatherings all over the world, staying tuned in to live
Praying,
broadcasting.
the Pope, the Congress.
Religious people were praying. Everybody else was following it closely. It was an amazing event in our lifetime.
Yeah.
So you were 18, I was 19 when this happened.
Yeah. So the point for the libertarian, let me draw that before we play the clip, this great clip, is that these are men highly identified with the positive masculine. Engineering, achievement, landing a man on the moon is an engineering achievement that falls into the positive masculine. And I want to talk about Jung's positive masculine, negative masculine, and then I want to talk a little after the clip about the positive feminine and the negative feminine. Okay. Because our culture is in a time of the negative feminine.
And that's an interesting concept, is that our culture can kind of reflect all four of those traits, depending on where you are.
Yeah. And it roughly identifies with the left and the right political groups. And it roughly identifies with Triver's parental investment, competition, male-male competition, what Darwin called male-male competition and female choice. So it kind of is understandable, although there's a little more complexity than appears when you just take a broad brush. Okay.
So you're telling me you can only give our guys 45 hours? That brings them to about there. Gentlemen, that's not acceptable. Gene, you gotta talk about power here. Whoa, guys! Power is everything.
Power is everything.
What do you mean?
Without it, they don't talk to us, they don't correct their trajectory, they don't turn the heat shield around. We gotta turn everything off. Now. They're not gonna make it to re-entry.
What do you mean, everything?
With everything on, the LEM draws 60 amps. At that rate, in 16 hours, the batteries are dead, not 45. And so's the crew. We got to get them down to 12 amps.
12 amps? How many?
You can't run a vacuum cleaner on 12 amps, John. We got to turn off. We have to turn off the radars, cabin heater, instrument displays, the guidance computer, the whole smack.
Whoa, guidance computer. What if they need to do another burn? Gene, they won't even know which way they're pointed.
The more time we talk down here, the more juice they waste up there. I've been looking at the data for the past hour.
That's the deal?
That's the deal.
Okay, John. The minute we finish the burn, we'll power down the LEM.
All right.
Now, in the meantime, we're gonna have a frozen command module up there. In a couple days, we're gonna have to power it up using nothing but the re-entry batteries.
Yeah, we've been tried before.
Hell, we've never even simulated it before, Gene.
Well, we're gonna have to figure it out. I want people in our simulators, working re-entry scenarios. I want you guys to find every engineer who designed every switch, every circuit, every transistor, and every light bulb that's up there. Then I want you to talk to the guy in the assembly line who actually built the thing. Find out how to squeeze every amp out of both of these goddamn machines. I want this mark all the way back to Earth with time to spare. We never lost an American in space. We're sure as hell not going to lose one on my watch. Failure is not an option.
So that clip characterizes the positive masculine in all of its glory, really. Ed Harris does a fantastic job, but I saw the guy, the real guy, Gene Kranz. I saw a picture of him. I guess it was YouTube. I guess it was NASA. He looked a little bit like him, but he acted just like him. I mean, just real military kind of control, focus, initiative, what we call in psychology agency. Very directed.
So I know you're going to get into the specifics of positive and negative masculine, positive and negative feminine, but just to help me with this first interpretation, positive masculine, I interpret that to mean protect, rescue, accomplish, that's the
well, rescuing would be an application of the positive masculine. Achievement would be, if I had to have one word to define it, I would use McClellan's motivational theory his triad, achievement, affiliation, and power, it's achievement. And in the clip, we see him, he sets the goal. He says, not on my watch. We're getting these men home. Failure is not optional. These men are coming home. You find a way to get it done. So he sets the goal of achieving getting those guys home. It's not really rescue. It's the goal of not on my watch. You know, it comes from the evolutionary adapted idea of male-male competition. From male-male competition, which is an evolutionary instinct for men and women to some degree, comes the idea of achievement. McClellan said, the best countries in the world are high achieving. The most people have an achievement motivation, not power, although power is kind of related in certain situations, and not affiliation. The feminine would be nurturing and affiliation. So the positive feminine would be nurturing, would be protecting more. You know, the protection would really come from the feminine side.
Okay, so the third one is power. Does that fit into male-female?
No, it doesn't fit into male-female, which is, I think, the thing that psychology is missing. I think that the power comes into play when it's combined with the masculine and the feminine. The need for power is a different thing than the masculine and feminine. Okay, so let's just regroup on what we're talking about. I don't know of any other archetype that's on display. Even the women, the wives, you know, they were just worried about these men the whole time. They didn't really get into the feminine. But this is a movie about the positive masculine. Mm-hmm. What we also know is the hero's journey or the archetype. I mean, we go from these guys are dead. There's no way they can get home to getting them home. We're actually miraculously getting them home. Yeah. You know, people that believe there was divine intervention, I can see how they believe that. Yeah. Because when you see the 13 things that added up to get these guys home, every one of them have gone a different way, and they would have been dead.
Well, the critical one, and you've already mentioned it, was that if that failure had happened at any other time during their trip, they wouldn't have made it.
Yeah, because they had to use the lunar module as a lifeboat.
Yeah, so
if it had been detached, if it had been after the moon landing, they wouldn't have had the lifeboat.
So do I have this right? The command module is the main ship, and the lunar module is the lifeboat. And they ended up making big use of the lunar module.
Yeah, they made use of the lunar module as a lifeboat, kept the command module attached. They let it freeze because they didn't have the power to keep it warmed up. They didn't know if it was going to light back up. They didn't know if the parachutes were going to open. They didn't know if the heat shield was going to hold. They didn't know if they could guide the thing back to the earth and get it to go into the, you know, it has to nip the earth atmosphere at a certain angle, a very precise angle. I mean, the story is dramatized. There are a few things that Ron Howard made a little more problematic than they were. Like, they weren't so far out of power. They had a bunch of amps in the limb in the lunar module. Okay, so why is this important to libertarians? The main thing that's important in today's world is that there began an attack on the positive masculine and the negative masculine. The negative masculine, let's say, and Trump portrays a very interesting combination of positive masculine and negative masculine.
Yeah, he sure has both of them, doesn't he?
He does have both of them. You know, and we've said before, that's because of his contractor background. But he's also so thick-skinned, I think he missed early on interpreting how thin-skinned other people are.
It's an amazing thing to watch.
Yeah. So he has a pretty strong negative masculine, but he has a great positive masculine, which the other side, the opponents, they ignore his positive masculine.
Well, he shows caring and feeling occasionally, but it's almost a surprise.
I think it probably surprises him a little bit. I mean, if I were his PR person, I would say, listen, you have to put your family relationships out front.
Yeah.
You have to show how you love your grandkids. I saw him with one of his grandkids. He was just sweet as he could be.
And he has a history of caring, charitable activities that you never hear about.
You never hear about them. Well, I mean, we have the propaganda media. They all have the Trump derangement syndrome.
But they understand, but I agree with you. It's his handlers that I don't understand. They should understand that they should be promoting that stuff.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. Let me make a point here. This is a very good time to make this point. So on the other side, you have the positive feminine. And then the people that operate out of the positive feminine have a negative feminine that they suppress. So you get suppression going on in these archetypes. And the only explanation that I have for the Trump derangement syndrome is that the people on the left who are dedicated to the positive feminine are projecting their negative feminine to Trump. And they see his negative masculine, but they're projecting the bulk of the emotion comes from the projection of the negative feminine.
Okay, I'm missing something.
Well, I'm probably making it more convoluted than it needs to be. But the negative feminine is the consuming, smothering, dependency promoting mother. It's easy to see the negative masculine is the bad king and the negative feminine is the bad queen. You know, the Disney character of the bad queen that wants to kill Snow White.
So are you saying that the Trump derangement people are projecting negative feminine to Trump?
They've got to be projecting their own shadow to Trump.
Okay.
What it contains. I'm going to finish up by explaining one other concept. And I feel like I'm explaining it badly today, but at least I'm getting it out there. One other concept is that according to Jung, and I believe this, and it makes me wonder why sexuality, sex, not gender, is under such attack by the left. The sex being men and women. Why is it under such attack? Why is sexual reproduction under such attack? I don't really understand why it is, but it is. It is. But the way Jung felt like the collective unconscious worked was men born males had an internal feminine, and Jung called it the anima, and women born female had an internal masculine called the animus. And that gave us the balancing act between the sexes, because if you're born male and you're masculine, you've got an internal feminine, you can respond, and a whole person, Jung felt like the better you are, the more engaged you were with your archetypal feminine if you were a male, and your archetypal masculine if you were a female, but not unconsciously, very capably engaged in a positive way, not in a negative way. So the reason this has to do with libertarians is because libertarians, we identify the importance of the individual, and some people are male with a well-developed inner female, and some people are male with a poorly developed feminine. Some people are female with a highly developed masculine, and some people are female with a poorly developed masculine. And we've completely erased that concept. Now we think it's biology. We think if you're male with a highly developed feminine, that you must be a woman. You're not. You're a male with an inner feminine that you haven't fully integrated in a certain way. So psychology has gone by the wayside in explaining some of this stuff.
I would like to go back to your Trump derangement syndrome and the positive and negative masculine, is that I've always been entertained by Trump because I have said this many times. He's just like the major contractors I've ever worked with. But our society, people in general, don't have much exposure to contractors. Their exposure to contractors is very limited, protected, and limited.
They don't go out to construction sites very often.
They aren't at construction sites. When they deal with a contractor, it's a very controlled environment. And they don't really see it. And I compare it to a dog. You have a dog that is a big, protective dog, and you know how to handle your dog. The dog might be growling at you and barking at you.
You know how to read your dog.
You read your dog, and you know not to be overly respond to your dog because you know how to interact with that dog. And that's, to me, that's the way these...
You had a lot of familiarity with contractors. And one of the first things you said that I thought was so important about Trump is like you watched him for a while and said, this guy is just like every contractor I've ever known.
Every one of them.
Yeah. I
say everyone.
I have a colleague, and I was discussing Trump with her, and she spits nails. She spits nails whenever I make her discuss. And she has a contractor and talked about the contractor being abusive to his son.
Yeah.
And I said, well, you accept that contractor as having negatives. And she tried to persuade me that he was very different than Trump, that Trump was somehow more evil and less worthwhile than her person that she was talking about. I thought, yeah. What a blindside. Yeah. That is similar. In fact, her person would be worse because I have not heard any of Trump's children say that he was abusive.
I was always shocked to see the way these contractors, the leader, the way he treated his coworkers, his key employees and subordinates. I mean, insulting, threatening. I'm an engineer. I would never work for someone like that. I would never be able to work for Trump because he's too damn insulting. I mean, I have my own.
Yeah, your thin skin comes from your family dynamics.
I'm a competitive, dominant male. I like to think that I am, and I would have a hard time tolerating that. But I recognize it, and you learn to work with it, and you learn what to be afraid of and what not to be afraid of.
I want to finish up by making a conclusion from what you said. In the clip of Apollo 13, and the whole thing is a problem-solving movie. I mean, those engineers are nose to the grindstone, solving a problem after problem after problem. To solve problems like that, you have to be thick-skinned. Now, one way to be thick-skinned is to be in the positive masculine and be highly controlled. The other is to have a clear goal that you're trying to reach so that anything that doesn't contribute to meeting the goal is just noise in the system, focus. So we see in that movie another characteristic of when McClellan said high-performing, basically McClellan said high-performing countries he basically meant high-performing countries are the same as a high-performing team. You've got to tolerate the masculine. You've got to tolerate the negative masculine. You've got to be able to hear the bad news and how you screwed up. You're not focusing on how people screw up, but you don't suppress and obfuscate how they screw up. Screw-ups are important for learning.
Another person that is very much reminds me of contractors and reminds me of Trump is Nick Saban. Nick Saban was the coach at LSU for a while, so I got to be familiar with what he was like.
Yeah, he was hard on people.
And then watch him at Alabama. That guy is a jerk, just like Trump is a jerk. But these guys are focused on what they are supposed to do.
And what we've got now in the culture of the negative feminine, we've got oversensitivity to everything. Oversensitivity to words, oversensitivity to people's feelings, oversensitivity to what, calling us a spade in science. We've got oversensitivity. What we've got is entitlement and enablement going on in the negative feminine.
Wow.